It was supposed to be the happiest day of their lives. A day marked by love, promises, and new beginnings. Pastor Luca Moretti and Judge Isabella De Santis had just said their vows, pledging to spend forever together. The world saw a perfect couple destined for greatness. But what no one could have known is that just hours later, their wedding night would take a horrific turn. In the early hours of that night, one of them would be dead, and the other, a man of faith, would stand accused of the unthinkable. How did it happen? What caused a man who had vowed to lead a life of love and peace to take the life of the woman he had just married? Was it something that began before the wedding night, a hidden truth that no one saw coming? Or did the events of that evening push him over the edge? In a story filled with shocking twists, the answer lies hidden beneath a veil of secrets, resentment, and spoken tension. But the truth will only come out once the silence is broken. A marriage built on vows of eternal love now shattered in a moment of rage and confusion. What happened that night will forever be remembered, not as the beginning of a beautiful story, but as the beginning of a tragedy that no one could have predicted. Pastor Luca Moretti was the kind of man who could command the room without saying a word. Tall, charming, with a presence that left people feeling at ease. His voice, smooth, calm, had a way of making even the most difficult of truths seem manageable. For years, he had led his congregation with unwavering faith, guiding them through moments of hardship, offering wisdom and hope when others couldn't. But Luca wasn't just a pastor. He was a man with ambitions, desires, and a complicated past that, until that night, had remained locked away. He was a man known for his grace in the eyes of his church, a man who could inspire. Yet, his own emotions were rarely exposed to those who followed him. Beneath the polished surface, Luca was carrying his own burdens, silent struggles no one would ever see. And then there was Isabella, Judge Isabella De Santis, a woman of intellect, a towering figure in the courtroom. She didn't just uphold the law, she was the law. With a sharp mind and a quick wit, Isabella earned the respect of her peers and the admiration of everyone who met her. Beneath her tough exterior, however, there was a softer side that few got to see. Isabella had worked hard for everything she had. Her journey to becoming a respected judge hadn't been easy, but her dedication and commitment had paid off. In the public eye, she was a model of success, a woman who had it all: beauty, brains, and a powerful career. Together, Luca and Isabella seemed like the perfect pair. They were opposites in some ways. Her commanding presence balanced his calm demeanor. Their individual strengths seemed to complement each other perfectly. To the outside world, they were the picture of harmony, a couple meant to be. But was it as perfect as it appeared? Behind closed doors, the reality of their marriage wasn't as simple as it seemed. Despite their success, there were cracks, hidden tensions and secrets neither wanted to confront. Neither wanted to admit that even their union could be strained. What could have gone wrong between two such seemingly perfect people? How could a night that was supposed to be the culmination of their dream become the night that ended it all? What do you think could break such a beautiful union? Let's dive deeper. The day had unfolded like a fairy tale. The ceremony was beautiful. Every detail was flawless, as if it had been carefully crafted for the perfect moment. The couple exchanged vows in front of a crowd of family, friends, and loved ones, their faces filled with smiles and laughter. The reception hall, adorned with soft lighting, candles flickering gently in the background, created an atmosphere of warmth and love. The sounds of music filled the air as guests danced, toasting to the new couple, celebrating the start of a life together. For most people, this would be the kind of day they dreamed of, a new beginning full of promise and hope. And for a moment, it seemed as if nothing could ruin it. But what no one knew as they laughed and danced was that behind the closed doors of their hotel room, a storm was quietly building. The tension that had been simmering under the surface for weeks, maybe even months, was about to explode. As the evening came to a close, the newlyweds retreated to their hotel room, the door closing softly behind them. What was supposed to be a night of passion, celebration, and joy quickly shifted to something much darker. In the quiet of that hotel room, something was changing. The room that had once been filled with the sounds of excitement was now eerily silent. as if the walls themselves were holding their breath. The couple, once full of hope and anticipation, stood in the stillness, facing a reality neither could have predicted. What began as a night of celebration would soon descend into something far worse. The air was thick with unspoken words, tension hanging between them. What they hadn't realized was that this moment, their wedding night, would become the night that shattered everything. What had once been a night of pure joy was now on the verge of something that would haunt them forever. As the door clicked shut behind them, the weight of the day seemed to lift, and the couple, for a moment, shared a quiet smile. It was the calm after the storm of the wedding ceremony, the perfect time to unwind. They had just entered the room, and it was finally their time to be alone, to enjoy the night that was meant to be the beginning of their happily ever after. Pastor Luca poured 2 glasses of champagne. The bubbles died as he handed one to Isabella. They clinked glasses, a soft laugh escaping Isabella's lips. For a moment, it seemed as though nothing had changed. The night was still young, their dreams still fresh. The conversation was light, easy, about the wedding, their plans for the future. The atmosphere was one of warmth and affection. But beneath that initial ease, something was starting to shift. If this story has you hooked, don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on the bell notification so you never miss what happens next. The champagne, sweet and effervescent, filled the room with its subtle scent. But as the night wore on, something else began to intrude on the peaceful silence. Isabella, who had once appeared perfect in his eyes, seemed somehow different. Luca, who had always admired every aspect of his bride, noticed it first. The subtle change in her demeanor, a shift in the air. At first, it was unnoticeable, almost imperceptible. But as the minutes passed, it became harder to ignore. There was a smell, a faint odor that lingered in the air, something that wasn't there before. To Luca, it was overpowering. It wasn't the scent of the day, the flowers, the perfume, but something else, something wrong. He tried to brush it aside, attributing it to the stress of the day, the exhaustion from the long hours of the wedding. But the longer he sat there, the more he couldn't escape it. The smell grew stronger, more distinct. He found it hard to concentrate, his mind racing. He tried to focus on Isabella's face, the woman he had just married, but his thoughts kept drifting back to the odor. Why was this happening? He had never noticed anything like it before. It wasn't as if Isabella smelled unclean. He knew her well, and she took great care of herself. But in that moment, his mind seemed to focus on this one detail. Something about it triggered him. A small, almost subconscious irritation that began to build into something darker, something deeper. It was a rage, inexplicable and sudden, flooding through him like a tide. A storm that had been lying dormant beneath his calm exterior, now rising to the surface. His perfect bride, the woman who had walked down the aisle just hours ago, suddenly seemed far from perfect. As the minutes ticked by, Luca's mind raced. Could it be possible that this simple thing, this smell, was enough to unravel everything? Was it a sign of something deeper, something he hadn't noticed before? A flaw, a hidden imperfection, or a betrayal of some kind that no one had seen coming? But the more Luca thought about it, the more intense his reaction became. What had once been a beautiful evening, a celebration of their love, was now becoming a moment of discomfort and suspicion. The woman he had chosen to spend the rest of his life with now felt unfamiliar. As Isabella laughed softly, oblivious to the storm brewing inside him, Luca's thoughts grew darker. His hands trembled slightly, his grip on his glass tightening. His smile, once genuine, faltered. The tension in the room was palpable. It wasn't something anyone could see, but it was there, hanging in the air, thick and suffocating. The silence grew longer between them, and with each passing second, Luca's thoughts seemed to spiral further. And then, something snapped. What happened next would change everything. It was a moment so sudden, so unexpected, that it would forever alter the course of their lives. Hold on, what you're about to hear will leave you speechless. Have you ever had a relationship that suddenly felt different? Where one small thing changed everything? Let me know in the comments. What do you think it could have been? In this case, Pastor Luca Moretti had always been known for his patience. As a pastor, he was a man who preached peace, understanding, and grace. His congregation admired his calm demeanor, the way he handled conflict without ever losing his cool. But tonight, the calm man who had walked down the aisle earlier that evening seemed to be slipping away. It was as if something inside him was slowly unraveling, tugged by an invisible thread that he couldn't see, but could feel. With every passing second, the smell, the discomfort, it wasn't something he could shake off. It gnawed at him, growing more intense with every breath he took. His eyes darted nervously across the room, then back to Isabella. She was still laughing, oblivious to the storm cloud forming behind his gaze. But he could no longer focus on her smile or the gentle warmth of the champagne in his hand. All he could think about was that smell. Unwelcome, unsettling, strangely alien. Was this just his mind playing tricks on him? Was it something insignificant, something he could ignore and brush away? Or was this a sign of something far deeper, something he hadn't seen before in Isabella? His thoughts spiraled into a tangled mess of doubt and suspicion. Luca's mind raced, his heartbeat quickening with each passing moment. The steady rhythm of his breath was no longer enough to calm him. It was as if the air itself was too thick to breathe, filled with invisible weight that pressed down on his chest. He had never felt like this before. Uneasy, confused, frustrated, angry, everything felt wrong. He stood there, frozen for a moment, as if waiting for the truth to reveal itself. His eyes flicked to Isabella again, her laughter still echoing in the room. But to him, it sounded distant. His grip on the champagne glass tightened. The tension that had been building was now beginning to overtake him, clouding his mind, turning his thoughts darker. He had prided himself on being a man of control, but now he could feel himself slipping. The smell, it wasn't just an inconvenience anymore. It was a trigger. Something about it triggered something inside him. A small simmering frustration turned into something more uncontrollable. Was this anger? His pulse quickened. His breathing grew erratic. He tried to calm himself, tried to tell himself that this was just a fleeting moment, just a passing thought. But it was too much, too overwhelming. He couldn't shake it. The irritation built, not just from the smell, but from everything that had been left unsaid between them. The moments of tension that had existed long before tonight. Little things that never quite fit together. He had noticed them, these cracks in the facade of their perfect union, but had ignored them. Until now. Now those cracks were widening, threatening to shatter everything. Isabella, still unaware of the internal battle raging within her husband, took another sip of her drink, her smile never faltering. She was blissfully unaware of how her husband was beginning to change in front of her. The man she had just pledged to love forever now seemingly a stranger. Luca's breathing grew more pronounced, his chest rising and falling faster. He couldn't look at her the same way anymore. The perfection he had once admired seemed to crumble in front of his eyes. She wasn't flawless. She wasn't the perfect bride he had imagined. This small, insignificant detail, the smell, had turned into a mountain he couldn't climb. His mind screamed at him, demanding answers. But all he could focus on now was his growing anger. The overwhelming feeling of betrayal, of disappointment, of helplessness. Was this really how it was going to end? Was this just the beginning of something far darker? Something he couldn't control? And then, without warning, it happened. His hand clenched around the glass so tightly that the fragile stem snapped under his grip. Shards of glass fell to the floor, the sound sharp and final. The glass, like his composure, shattered. What would he do next? Was this just the beginning of something terrifying? If this story has you hooked, don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on the bell notification so you never miss what happens next. The room was thick with tension, the air heavy, as if the world itself held its breath. Pastor Luca Moretti's mind had fractured in that moment. The anger, the frustration, the growing sense of betrayal, all of it coalesced into a single, devastating act. In a blind rage, everything he had known about himself, Everything he had worked to build, shattered. Isabella, his bride, the woman he had promised to love and protect for the rest of his life, stood before him, unaware of the storm that was about to consume them both. Luca's trembling hands hovered above the shattered glass, blood rushing to his head as he struggled to regain his composure. But in the depths of his mind, there was no rational thought. The rationality he had clung to for years slipped away. There was only the need to act. No longer able to stand the discomfort, the frustration, and the suffocating feeling of helplessness, his eyes locked onto her. Isabella, still sitting, her back turned slightly as she hummed a quiet tune. The rage inside him exploded. Without a moment's hesitation, he struck. It wasn't violent at first. No grand show of force. It was swift, a sudden movement, a decision made in an instant. Something primal overtaking his usual composure. Luca lunged forward, his hands now pressing down on Isabella, choking out any chance for her to escape. His mind was clouded with confusion, anger, and something far more dangerous, an overwhelming desire to silence her, to stop the unbearable tension that had consumed him. In those moments, everything about their perfect wedding night faded away. There was no longer any room for love or affection, only the cold grip of rage. And with that, he ended it. He took her life in an act of sheer madness. A decision made in the dark, when no one was there to witness the terrifying transformation of a man once revered for his calm, into a killer, driven by a twisted sense of entitlement. Isabella's body slumped in his arms as the life drained from her. The silence of the room now deafening. Pastor Luca, his heart pounding in his chest, stepped back, eyes wide with horror, realizing the magnitude of what he had just done. The aftermath was gruesome. Blood stained the pristine sheets. The lifeless body of his bride sprawled unnaturally across the bed. Luca's breath came in ragged gasps, as though trying to breathe life back into the woman he had just taken. The stark realization of his actions set in slowly, too slowly. There was no going back from this. The police arrived not long after. The flashing lights illuminated the scene outside. The once beautiful wedding suite, now filled with the haunting silence of a life lost, was no longer a place of joy, but a crime scene. The door was broken open and officers flooded the room, their eyes immediately falling on the bloody body of Isabella. Luca was there, standing near the window, his hands trembling, his eyes distant, unfocused. He had no words, no explanation, just the broken look of a man who had made the ultimate decision, one that had destroyed everything. And there it was, the evidence. Bloodstains soaking the bed, the pillow, the sheets. The horror of the night laid bare. The sound of police radios crackling in the distance felt like a slow, crushing reminder that there was no escape now. But the question remained, what drove him to commit such an act? Was it a moment of madness? A fleeting break in his mind that led him to snap? Or had something darker been at play all along? A hidden part of him that had always been there, waiting to be unleashed? What was the true reason for this senseless violence? A momentary lapse in judgment, or something much deeper, something buried in the darkness of Luca's mind? The shock of the crime scene sent ripples through the local police department. The hotel room, once filled with laughter and joy, was now an eerie, silent place of tragedy. As detectives and officers arrived at the scene, they were met with the grim reality of what had transpired. Crime scene photos, blood-stained sheets, and the lifeless body of Judge Isabella De Santis were the only witnesses to the horrifying events that had unfolded just hours earlier. But there was something strange about the scene. Luca Moretti, the man at the center of it all, was nowhere to be found. His absence sent a shiver of unease through the officers, raising questions. Was he running from the crime? Did he know the gravity of what he had done? Or did he have a shocking explanation? Something that could clear his name or at least provide some insight into the darkness that had led him to commit such a brutal act. As detectives began to search the hotel and the surrounding area for any sign of Pastor Luca, the questions continued to mount. How could a man who had seemed so calm, so in control, have snapped in such a violent way? What was it that drove him to take the life of the woman he had just married? Luca had vanished, but the truth wouldn't remain hidden for long. It wasn't long before the police received an unexpected phone call. Luca had been found, not far from the hotel, walking aimlessly down a quiet street. His expression was distant and vacant. He had no clear explanation for where he had been or what had happened after the crime. But what he said next sent shock waves through the investigators. Luca claimed that the events of that night hadn't gone down the way the police might have imagined. According to him, it wasn't a calculated act of violence. It was self-defense. Luca insisted that Isabella had attacked him. The story he told was one of fear, panic, and a desperate need to protect himself. "She came at me. I had no choice. She was going to hurt me." His voice, shaky but firm, relayed a version of the night that the police had not expected. He said Isabella had grown violent after they began arguing, that something inside her had snapped, and that he had only reacted to defend himself from her assault. The accusation seemed bizarre, considering the evidence in the room. No signs of struggle from Isabella, no physical indication that she had attacked him in any way. But Luca stood by his story, even as the officers questioned his increasingly erratic behavior. His eyes darted. His hands twitched. His voice was filled with confusion. He wasn't making sense. His claims were unsubstantiated. And yet, there was something about his demeanor that suggested he believed them. Was this the ravings of a man who had cracked under the weight of his own guilt? Or was there something more to his story? As detectives began to sift through the evidence, examining forensic reports, photos of the scene, and speaking to hotel staff, they found no evidence to support Luca's claims. No signs of Isabella becoming violent. No wounds on his body to suggest he had been attacked. In fact, everything pointed to one horrifying truth. The act was not one of self-defense, but an act of cold, calculated murder. Still, the more they dug, the more they uncovered strange inconsistencies in Luca's story. How had he made it out of the room so quickly? Why did he leave the crime scene without attempting to help or call for assistance? There were too many unanswered questions. But despite the mounting evidence against him, Luca held on to his story. Something had triggered him. Something that made him feel as if he had no choice but to defend himself. What do you think? Did Pastor Luca really snap in the heat of the moment? Or is there something darker at play here? Could he be hiding something deeper? Drop your thoughts in the comments. As the investigation continued, the truth behind Pastor Luca Moretti's violent actions began to unfold in unexpected ways. What initially seemed like an isolated, explosive incident was actually part of something much darker. Something that had been simmering beneath the surface for months, if not years. If this story has you hooked, don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on the bell notification so you never miss what happens next.